Hello, hello, and happy Thursday, sweet friends. Last week I was on a tech vacation and it was wonderful. I really need to do it more often. It is so good for my soul to completely disconnect and to just be in the moment with my family. So Damien, Garu, and I ended up making a trip to New Brunswick and then to Nova Scotia, and it was a wonderful week. And because I was in the Maritimes and close to the ocean, I felt like painting a lighthouse again this week. So I'm not going to paint a lighthouse from Canada, although I have taken pictures and I'm sure at some point I will. This week I've decided to paint what I think is the most beautiful lighthouse here in Maine, and that's the Portland Head Lighthouse in Cape Elizabeth. And I will share a picture of the lighthouse with you so you get a chance to see what it looks like. And then I'll paint it from my perspective and with my aesthetic style. I hope you will feel like joining me. And if you don't, because you just feel tired and you feel like you just need a chance to relax, I would like to invite you to do that as well. So whether you choose to pick up your paint supplies or have a seat and relax with me, you are very welcome to be here with me. I am sending you lots and lots of love. I'm thinking of you lots, and that's it. I'm tired. You would think a vacation would be a restful thing, and it usually is, but oftentimes that almost means I need a vacation from my vacation, which is not happening. But anyway, let's get going with the painting process. And as usual, I am so ever thankful that you are here with me. For my painting process, I'm going to be working with my Decadent Pies paint palette from Prima Watercolors. It's a little palette that has pretty much all the colors I want to use in this painting process, and it's also the palette that I used a couple of weeks ago when I painted my first lighthouse. And so when I am thinking of working or developing maybe a little collection, it's always a good idea to use either the same colors or some repeating elements. And that is why I decided to work with this palette. Here's a picture of the lighthouse I'm going to be painting. I'm going to be repeating some of the elements in the photo, but I am painting it in my own style. And so I'm going to try my best to use the photo initially and then move on to just painting freestyle so that I don't get too influenced by what I'm seeing, but still keep the elements that I want to reflect in the painting. And so I want it to look like the lighthouse at Cape Elizabeth, and so I want some of the elements, like the buildings in particular, to be in the painting for sure, but the rest I want to be a little bit more loose in creating. And so I will look at the picture at first and then I will eventually leave it. So I'm using a wet on wet method of applying my paint here, and that means that I have not let the paint that's on the bottom of my painting or on the paper so far, I haven't let it dry, and I'm coming in and I'm adding more colors. And by doing so, I am gonna let my colors bleed into each other, and this is something that I really like. I find that it has a more organic look, and so I love to work in this way. After painting the bottom portion of my painting, I am going to apply a little bit of salt over the wet paint, and then I will let it fully dry and move on to painting the top portion of my painting. Since I'm going to be working on painting the buildings in my painting, and I'm going to be creating some finer details, I have pulled out a few of my smaller brushes so that I can paint with more precision. And this is just a nice rule of thumb to keep in mind, especially if you're painting things like buildings or other, whether it be figures or anything that requires a little bit of a finer touch and some more detail. It's always better to work with smaller brushes. And you probably noticed that when I started my painting process, I was working with bigger brushes because I was not being quite so careful as I am right now. So this is just a nice rule of thumb to remember when working with watercolors, and in general for a lot of different types of mediums. It's a good rule of thumb to apply because the bigger your substrate, the bigger your brushes or your tools, and the smaller your substrate, the smaller your brushes and tools is usually a good thing to remember. by mixing some pecan, some apple, some blueberry and blackberry, along with even a little bit of the key lime color, I can create a really dark color that's close to black without actually being black. And this is the color that's going to work, I think, well for me in this painting. And I love when I'm working with a palette to try and mix the colors from the palette together to create other colors, because the colors in a palette usually go pretty well together. And I find that the colors in this palette in particular do work quite well together. And so when I mix them together to create other colors, it helps keep the whole painting more cohesive, and it just makes sense. Since I've drawn in my sun to be to the right of my lighthouse, I've decided to add my shading to the left of my buildings, and that's how I will continue to develop my colors as I go along. Star gold is always a nice way to finish a painting, and I believe once I will be done adding this star gold to my painting, I will be ready to call it completed. The very first time Damien and I visited the Portland Head Lighthouse was in November of 2021, and at the time we were living in Vermont and didn't know that at some point we'd be moving to Maine. So it is nice now, a few years later, to be here in Maine and to finally make the time to paint this iconic place, a really beautiful lighthouse in our state. And I hope you enjoyed watching me work on it. It was definitely a fun project for me to create. In stressful times, it's important to connect with loving people for support. They can be a beacon of light that helps us find our way through the darkness. And if at times that light seems harder to find, don't forget about the bright and loving light that shines from deep within your heart and soul. I can attest to its brightness, and I'm so thankful you come here to shine it on me and on our creative community. Thank you again for making the time to join me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week, sweet friends, and happy creating!